Part 1, Chapter 4 of The Daisy Chain. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Daisy Chain by Charlotte Mary Yonge. Part 1, Chapter 4. They may not mar the deep repose of that immortal flower, though only broken hearts are found to watch her cradle by. No blight is on her slumbers found, no touch of harmful eye. Lyra Innocentium. Such a strange, sad Sunday! No going to church, but all the poor children moving in awe and oppression about the house, speaking under their breath as they gathered in the drawing-room. Into the study they might not go, and when Blanche would have asked why, Tom pressed her hand and shuddered. Etheldred was allowed to come and look at Margaret, and even to sit in the room for a little while, to take the place of Miss Winter, but she was not sensible of sufficient usefulness to relieve the burden of fear and bewilderment in the presence of that still, pale form, and what was almost worse, the sight of the familiar objects, the chair by the fire, the sofa, the books, the work-basket, the letter-case, the dressing-things, all these were too oppressive. She sat crouched up, with her face hidden in her hands, and the instant she was released, hastened back to Norman. She was to tell him that he might go into the room, but he did not move, and Mary alone went in and out with messages. Dr. May was not to be visited, for he was in the same half-conscious state, apparently sensible only of bodily suffering, though he answered when addressed, and no one trusted to speak to him but Flora and Earnscliff. The rest wore through the day as best they might. Harry slept a good deal, Ethel read to herself, and tried to get Norman to look at passages which she liked. Mary kept the little ones from being troublesome, and at last took them to peep behind the schoolroom blinds for Richard's coming. There was a simultaneous shout when, at 4 o'clock, they caught sight of him, and though, at Ethel's exclamation of wonder, Mary and Tom hung their heads at having forgotten themselves, the association of gladness in seeing Richard was refreshing, the sense of being desolate and forsaken was relieved, and they knew that now they had one to rely on and to comfort them. Harry hastened to open the front door, and Richard, with his small trim figure and fresh fair young face, flushed, though not otherwise agitated, was among them, almost devoured by the younger ones, and dealing out quiet caresses to them, as he caught from the words and looks of the others that at least his father and sister were no worse. Mr. Wilmot had come with him, but only stayed to hear the tidings. "Can I see papa?" were Richard's first audible words. All the rest had been almost dumb show. Ethel thought not, but took him to Margaret's room, where he stood for many minutes without speaking, then whispered to Flora that he must go to the others. She should call him if, and went down, followed by Ethel. Tom and Blanche had fallen into teasing tricks, a sort of melancholy play to relieve the tedium. They grew cross. Norman was roused to reprove sharply, and Blanche was beginning to cry. But Richard's entrance set all at peace. He sat down among them, and with soft voice and arm around Blanche, as she leaned against him, made her good in a moment, and she listened while he talked over with Norman and Ethel all they could bear to speak of. Late in the day, Flora came into her father's room and stood gazing at him, as he lay with eyes closed, breathing heavily, and his brows contracted by pain. She watched him with piteous looks, as if imploring him to return to his children. Poor girl! To-day's quiet, after the last evening's bustle, was hard to bear. She had then been distracted from thought by the necessity of exertion, but it now repaid itself, and she knew not how to submit to do nothing but wait and watch. "No change?" inquired Alan Earnscliff, looking kindly in her face. "No," replied she, in a low, mournful tone. A voice which she did not expect asked inquiringly, "Margaret?" and her heart beat as if it would take away her breath, as she saw her father's eyes intently fixed on her. "Did you speak of her?" he repeated. "Yes, dear papa," said Flora, not losing presence of mind, though in extreme fear of what the next question might be. She is quite uncomfortable, so don't be uneasy, pray." "Let me hear," he said, and his whole voice and air showed him to be entirely roused. "There is injury? What is it?" He continued his inquiries till Flora was obliged fully to explain her sister's condition, and then he dismayed her by saying he would get up and go to see her. Much distressed, she begged him not to think of it, and appealed to Alan, who added his entreaties that he would at least wait for Mr. Ward, but the doctor would not relinquish his purpose, and sent her to give notice that he was coming. Mr. Earnscliff followed her out of the room and tried to console her as she looked at him in despair. "You see he's quite himself, quite collected," he said. "You heard how clear and coherent his questions were. Can't it be helped? Do try to stop him till I can send to Mr. Ward." "I will try, but I think he is in a state to judge for himself." "I do, upon my word, and I believe trying to prevent him would be more likely to do him harm than letting him satisfy himself. I really think you need not be alarmed." "But you know," said Flora, coming nearer, and almost gasping as she whispered a sign towards the door, "she's there. It is mamma's room that will tell all." "I believe he knows," said Alan. "It was that which made him faint after the accident, for he had his perceptions fully at first. I have suspected all day that he was more himself than he seemed, but I think he could not bear to awaken his mind to understand it, and that he was afraid to hear about her, your sister, so that our mention of her was a great relief and did him good. I am convinced he knows the rest. Only go on, be calm, as you have been, and we shall do very well." Flora went to prepare. Ethel eagerly undertook to send to Mr. Ward, and hastened from the room as if in a sort of terror, shrinking perhaps from what might lead to an outburst of grief. She longed to have seen her father, but was frightened at the chance of meeting him. When she had sent her message and told her brothers what was passing, she went and lingered on the stairs and in the passage for tidings. After what seemed a long time, Flora came out and hastened to the nursery, giving her intelligence on the way. Better than could be hoped. He walked alone into the room and was quite calm and composed. "Oh, if this will not hurt him! If the seeing baby was but over!" "Does he want her?" "Yes, he would have come up here himself, but I would not let him. Nurse, do you hear? Papa wants baby. Let me have her." "Bless me, Miss Flora, you can't hold her while you're all of a tremble. And has he been to Miss Margaret?" "Yes, nurse, and he was only rather stiff and lame." "Did Margaret seem to know him?" said Ethel. "She just answered in that dreamy way when he spoke to her. He says he thinks it is as Mr. Ward believes, and that she will soon come to herself. He's quite able to consider." "And he knows all?" "I'm sure he does. He desired to see baby, and he wants you, nurse. Only mind you command yourself. Don't say a word you can help. Do nothing to agitate him." Nurse promised, but the tears came so fast, in sobs with them, as she approached her master's room, that Flora saw no composure could be expected from her, and taking the infant from her, carried it in, leaving the door open for her to follow when wanted. Ethel stood by listening. There was silence at first, then some sounds from the baby, and his father's voice soothing it, in his wonted caressing phrases and tones, so familiar that they seemed to break the spell, drive away her vague terrors, and restore her father. Her heart bounded, and a sudden impulse carried her to the bedside, at once forgetting all dread of seeing him and chance of doing him harm. He lay, holding the babe close to him, and his face was not altered, so that there was nothing in the sight to impress her with need of caution, and to the consternation of the anxious Flora, she exclaimed, abruptly and vehemently, "Papa, should she not be christened?" Dr. May looked up at Ethel and then at the infant. "Yes," he said, "at once," then added feebly and languidly, "some one must see to it." There was a pause, while Flora looked reproachfully at her sister, and Ethel became conscious of her imprudence, but in a few moments Dr. May spoke again, first to the baby, and then asking, "Is Richard here?" "Yes, papa." "Send him up presently. Where's nurse?" Ethel retreated, much alarmed at her rash measure, and when she related it, she saw that Richard and Mr. Earnscliff both thought it had been a great hazard. "Papa wants you," was a welcome sound to the ears of Richard, and brought a pink glow into his face. He was never one who readily showed his feelings, and there was no danger of his failing in self-command, though grievously downcast, not only at the loss of the tender mother who had always stood between him and his father's impatience, but by the dread that he was too dull and insignificant to afford any help or comfort in his father's dire affliction. Yet there was something in the gentle, sad look that met him, and in the low tone of the "How d'you do, Richie?" that drove off the thought of not being loved, and when Dr. May further added, "You'll see about it all. I am glad you're come," he knew he was of use, and was encouraged and cheered. That his father had full confidence and reliance in him, and that his presence was a satisfaction and relief he could no longer doubt, and this was a drop of balm beyond all his hopes, for loving and admiring his father intensely, and with depressed spirits and a low estimate of himself, he had begun to fancy himself incapable of being anything but a vexation and burden. He sat with his father nearly all the evening, and was to remain with him at night. The rest were comforted by the assurance that Dr. May was still calm, and did not seem to have been injured by what had passed. Indeed, it seemed as if the violence and suddenness of the shock, together with his state of suffering, had deadened his sensations, for there was far less agitation about him than could have been thought possible in a man of such strong, warm affections and sensitive temperament. Ethel and Norman went up arm in arm at bedtime. "I'm going to ask if I may wish Papa good night," said Ethel. "Shall I say anything about your coming?" Norman hesitated, but his cheeks blanched. He shuddered, shook his head without speaking, ran up after Harry, and waved her back when she would have followed. Richard told her that she might come in, and as she slowly advanced, she thought she had never seen anything so ineffably mournful as the affectionate look on her father's face. She held his hand and ventured, for it was with difficulty she spoke, to hope he was not in pain. "Better than it was, thank you, my dear," he said, in a soft, weak tone. Then, as she bent down to kiss his brow, "You must take care of the little ones." "Yes, Papa." She could hardly answer, and a large drop gathered slowly in each eye, long in coming, as if the heart ached too much for them to flow freely. "Are they all well?" "Yes, Papa." "And good?" He held her hand as if lengthening the interview. "Yes, very good all day." A long, deep sigh. Ethel's 2 tears stood on her cheeks. "My love to them all. I hope I shall see them tomorrow. God bless you, my dear. Good night." Ethel went upstairs, saddened and yet soothed. The calm, silent sorrow, too deep for outward tokens, was so unlike her father's usually demonstrative habits as to impress her all the more. Yet those 2 tears were followed by no more. There was much strangeness and confusion in her mind in the newness of grief. She found poor Flora, spent with exertion under the reaction of all she had undergone, lying on her bed, sobbing as if her heart would break, calling in gasps of irrepressible agony on "Mamma, mamma," yet with her face pressed down on the pillow that she might not be heard. Ethel, terrified and distressed, timidly implored her to be comforted, but it seemed as if she were not even heard. She would have fed someone, but whom? Alas, alas! It brought back the sense that no mother would ever soothe them. Margaret, Papa, both so ill, nurse engaged with Margaret. Ethel stood helpless and despairing, and Flora sobbed on, so that Mary awakened to burst out in a loud, frightened fit of crying. But in a few moments a step was at the door, a knock, and Richard asked, "Is anything the matter?" He was in the room in a moment, caressing and saying affectionate things with gentleness and fondling care, like his mother, and which recalled the days when he had been proud to be left for a little while the small nurse and guardian of the lesser ones. Mary was hushed in a moment, and Flora's exhausted weeping was gradually soothed when she was able to recollect that she was keeping him from her father. With kind good nights, he left Ethel to read her till she could sleep. Long did Ethel read after both her sisters were slumbering soundly. She went on in a sort of dreamy grief, almost devoid of pain, as if all this was too terrible to be true, and she had imagined herself into a story which would give place at dawn to her ordinary life. At last she went to bed and slept till awakened by the return of Flora, who had crept down in her dressing gown to see how matters were going. Margaret was in the same state. Papa was asleep, after a restless, distressing night, with much pain and some fever, and whenever Richard had begun to hope from his tranquillity that he was falling asleep, he was undeceived by hearing an almost unconsciously uttered sigh of "Maggie, my Maggie," and then the head turned wearily on the pillow, as if worn out with the misery from which there was no escape. Towards morning the pain had lessened, and as he slept he seemed much less feverish than they could have ventured to expect. Norman looked wan and wretched, and could taste no breakfast. Indeed, Harry reported that he had been starting and talking in his sleep half the night, and had proceeded to groaning and crying out till, when it could be borne no longer, Harry waked him and finished his night's rest in peace. The children were kept in the drawing room that morning, and there were strange steps in the house, but only Richard and Mr. Earnscliff knew the reason. Happily there had been witnesses enough of the overturn to spare any reference to Dr. May. The violent start of the horses had been seen, and Adams and Mr. Earnscliff agreed, under their breath, that the new black one was not fit to drive, while the whole town was so used to Dr. May's headlong driving that everyone was recollecting their own predictions of accidents. They needed little to account for the disaster. The only wonder was that it had not happened sooner. "I say," announced Harry, soon after they were released again, "I've been in to Papa. His door was open, and he heard me and called me. He says he should like any of us to come in and see him. Hadn't you better go, Norman?" Norman started up and walked hastily out of the room, but his hands shook so that he could hardly open the door, and Ethel, seeing how it was with him, followed him quickly, as he dashed at full speed up the stairs. At the top, however, he was forced to cling to the rail, gasping for breath while the moisture started on his forehead. "Dear Norman," she said, "there's nothing to mind. He looks just as usual. You would not know there was anything the matter." But he rested his head on his hand, and looked as if he could not stir. "I see it won't do," said Ethel. "Don't try. You will be better by and by, and he has not asked for you in particular." "I won't be beat by such stuff," said Norman, stepping hastily forwards and opening the door suddenly. He got through the greeting pretty well. There was no need for him to speak. He only gave his hand and looked away, unable to bring himself to turn his eyes on his father, and afraid of letting his own face be seen. Almost at the same moment, nurse came to say something about Margaret, and he seized the opportunity of withdrawing his hand and hurrying away in good time, for he was pale as death, and was obliged to sit down on the head of the stairs and lean his head against Etheldred. "What does make me so ridiculous?" he exclaimed, faintly but very indignantly. The first cure was the being forced to clear out of Mr. Ward's way, which he could not effect without being seen, and Ethel, though she knew that he would be annoyed, was not sorry to be obliged to remain and tell what was the matter with him. "Oh," said Mr. Ward, turning and proceeding to the dining room, "I'll set that to rights in a minute, if you will ask for a tumbler of hot water, Miss Ethel." And armed with the cordial he had prepared, Ethel hunted up her brother and persuaded him, after scolding her a little, to swallow it and take a turn in the garden, after which he made a more successful attempt at visiting his father. There was another room whither both Norman and Etheldred wished to go, though they dared not hint at their desire. At last Richard came to them as they were wandering in the garden, and, with his usual stillness of manner, shaded with additional seriousness, said, "Would you like to come into the study?" Ethelred put one hand into his, Norman took the other, and soon they stood in that calm presence. Fair, cold, white, and intensely still, that face brought home to them the full certainty that the warm, brightening look would never beam on them, the soft blue eyes never guide, check, and watch them, the smile never approve or welcome them. To see her unconscious of their presence was too strange and sad, and all were silent, till, as they left the room, Ethel looked out at Blanche and Aubrey in the garden. They will never remember her. Oh, why should it be? Richard would fain have moralized and comforted, but she felt as if she knew it all before, and heard with languid attention. She had rather read than talk, and he sat down to write letters. There were no near relations to be sent for. Dr. May was an only son, and his wife's sister, Mrs. Arnott, was in New Zealand. Her brother had long been dead, and his widow, who lived in Edinburgh, was scarcely known to the May family. Of friends there were many, fast bound by affection and gratitude, and notes, inquiries, condolences, and offers of service came in thickly, and gave much occupation to Flora, Richard, and Alan Earnscliff in turn. No one from without could do anything for them. They had all the help they wanted in Miss Minter and in Alan, who was invaluable in sharing with Richard the care of the doctor, as well as in giving him the benefit of his few additional years' experience and relieving him of some of his tasks. He was indeed like one of themselves, and a most valuable help and comforter. Mr. Wilmot gave them all the time he could, and on this day saw the doctor, who seemed to find some solace in his visit, though saying very little. On this day the baby was to be baptized. The usual Stoneborough fashion was to collect all the christenings for the month into one Sunday, except those for such persons as thought themselves too refined to see their children christened before the congregation, and who preferred an empty church and a week-day. The little one had waited till she was nearly 6 weeks old for a christening Sunday, and since that had been missed, she could not be kept unbaptized for another month, so late in the day she was carried to church. Richard had extremely gratified old nurse by asking her to represent poor Margaret. Mrs. Hoxton stood for the other godmother, and Alan Earnscliff was desired to consider himself absolutely her sponsor, not merely a proxy. The younger children alone were to go with him. It was too far off, and the way lay too much through the town for it to be thought proper for the others to go. Ethel wished it very much, and thought it nonsense to care whether people looked at her, and in spite of Miss Winter's seeming shocked at her proposing it, had a great mind to persist. She would even have appealed to her papa if Flora had not stopped her, exclaiming, "Really, Ethel, I think there never was a person so entirely without consideration as you are." Much abashed, Ethel humbly promised that if she might go into papa's room, she would not say one word about the christening unless he should begin, and to her great satisfaction he presently asked her to read the service to him. Flora came to the doorway of Margaret's room and listened. When she had finished, all was silent. How can we virtuously bring up our motherless little sister? Was the thought with each of the girls. The answers were in one mind. "I trust we shall do well by her, dear little thing. I see on an emergency that I know how to act. I never thought I was capable of being of so much use, thanks to dear mamma's training. I shall manage, I am sure, and so they will all depend on me and look up to me." How nice it was to hear dear papa say what he did about the comfort of my being able to look after Margaret. In the other, poor darling, it is the saddest of all for her, because she knows nothing, and will never remember her mamma. But if Margaret is but better, she will take care of her, and oh, how we ought to try! And I, such a naughty, wild thing, if I should hurt the dear little ones by carelessness or by my bad example. Oh, what shall I do for want of someone to keep me in order, if I should vex papa by any of my wrong ways? They heard the return of the others, and the sisters both sprang up. "May we bring her to you?" said Flora. "Yes, do, my dears." The sisters all came down together with the little one, and Flora put her down within the arm her father stretched out for her. He gazed into the baby face, which, in its expressionless placidity, almost recalled her mother's tranquil sweetness. Gertrude Margaret, said Flora, and with a look that had more of tenderness than grief, he murmured, my daisy blossom, my little Maggie. Might we? Said Ethel, when Flora took her again. Might we take her to her godmother to see if she would notice her? He looked as if he wished it, but said, no, I think not. Better not rouse her. And sighed heavily. Then, as they stood round his bed, unwilling to go, he added, girls, we must learn carefulness and thoughtfulness. We have no one to take thought for us now. Flora pressed the babe in her arms. Ethel's two reluctant tears stood on her cheeks. Mary exclaimed, I'll try not to be naughty. And Blanche climbed up to kiss him, saying, I will be always good, Papa. Daisy, Papa's Daisy, your vows are made, whispered Ethel, gaining sole possession of the babe for a minute. You have promised to be good and holy. We have the keeping of you, Mamma's precious flower, her pearl of truth. Oh, may God guard you to be an unstained jewel till you come back to her again, and a blooming flower till you are gathered into the wreath that never fades. My own sweet, poor little motherless Daisy. End of Part 1, Chapter 4.